So I'm Mick Fels, and my wife and I are farming in the Wittenoom Hills area, 50 k's northeast of Esperance on the south coast of WA. Yeah, so we own 4,000 hectares and lease another 2,000 hectares, and it's 100% cropping. Pretty simple rotation, just cereals and canola and a little bit of lupins thrown in. All continuous crop. We're disc sowing, and stubble retention is a big part of what we do, and I do feel like we're heading in the right direction. Our yields are continually increasing. We're actually using less inputs now, certainly in terms of chemicals, than we were, and soil health is definitely improving. You can just tell, by the resilience of the soil. We seem to be getting through those dry patches, better than we were. Like lately, we haven't had a lot of rain for the last month, and the crops have stayed green and fresh, and we just had 15 to 20 mils now, which is just perfect to finish crops off. So yeah, I feel like we're heading in the right direction with soil health, but we're obviously always looking for what's the next gain that we can make in building our soils and making them more resilient, which that's really what it's all about these days, I think. So in terms of our soils, we've got a real mixed bag. So starting with our most southern high rainfall country is basically coastal sandplain. So some of that's sort of shallow heath type country, and then it moves into deep sand dunes and paperbark swamps. So we start down there, and as we go north, we get into what we call transitional mallee, which is sort of sandy on top. Actually, where we are here, this trail site is mallee, but it's sandy mallee, so it's a shallow duplex with a sandy layer over a dome clay base. And then we can get through the middle of this farm, we're getting down into some really good heavy crab hole type country, heavy clays. We've got a fair bit of gravel country as well, so yeah, it's a real mixed bag. Trying to come up with a farming system where we can apply the same sort of methods across all those soil types and get good results on all of them. Yeah, so wheat, barley and canola are our staples, pretty much on a third of the farm to each of those crop types. We are bringing legumes in. Everybody around here is they would love to make legumes work. We haven't really found a good profitable legume here, which is why we don't grow a lot of legumes. But it would be fantastic if we could, introduce a legume and make it profitable, because you certainly see the benefits to the rest of the rotation, not just in soil fertility, but also just in the herbicide rotations and controlling your soil pathogens and all that stuff. They really have a good fit, but it's difficult to consistently make profit out of legumes here. But yeah, that's just something that we're continually working on. We're sort of coming out of one phase of a rotation into another one, and the thing with changing rotations across a farm, we block farms, so we have, might have a couple of thousand hectares of wheat together and a couple of thousand hectares of canola. And we try to do it in blocks for convenience and for productivity. Just coming out of what I call a 6-year stacked rotation, so that was 2 wheats, followed by 2 barleys, followed by 2 canolas, and then back into 2 wheats. So it's a bit of a radical type of rotation, particularly having 2 canolas in a row. But the whole basis of it is that then you have a 4-year break from that crop type, and that basically cleans out all your pathogens for that crop type. So when we're coming into the canola phase, there is 0 canola residue, 0 canola diseases. We're safely having 2 canola crops in a row without any real issues with sclerotinia or blackleg. It's been working well for us, but having 4 years in a row of cereal is challenging, certainly in terms of weed control. That's probably the biggest issue, is at the end of that 4 years, sometimes if we'd had a couple of wet years thrown in there with some waterlogging and things, the ryegrass is, you're fighting ryegrass again. And that's so that's a bit of a weakness in that rotation. Obviously, your broadleaf crops give you good ryegrass control options. So I am sort of shuffling back now, sort of more towards just a wheat, barley, canola, 3-year type rotation. That's what we actually came away from when we started this tech rotation. So I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but it's just to sort of keep the broadleaf crops in more regularly. But I'm hoping also to bring the legume in there and maybe have a canola followed by a legume and then a wheat and barley. And that extra year, I think, actually makes quite a big difference in the spacing between the crop types. And hopefully, a much more resilient rotation as well if we can get a legume in there. Just got to work out how to make them profitable. So if we can do that. I think a lot's changed in the last 10 years for us, and I am more optimistic that we can profitably grow legumes now. The biggest challenge in this environment is ryegrass. It's as simple as that. So our whole farming system has evolved around managing ryegrass, not managing it, but beating it, thriving with the threat of ryegrass and not being overcome by ryegrass problems. So, we're on narrow row spacings, which for us means discs. So we started sowing with discs because we wanted narrow row spacings, mainly for the ryegrass competition. But it turns out, you get extra yield as well. So that's just a freebie. So that's been really good, and I think that's one of the reasons, our profitability keeps going up, is the narrow row spacings and the discs. Probably the other benefit from the disc, particularly on our heavier soil types, is our soil structure is just drastically improving. Like our heaviest soils now, you drive on them in summer and it feels like you're driving on sand. It's soft, it's just crumbly on top. And that stuff used to be just like a brick. Sowing with this and the narrow row spacings have been the big things that we've tried to do, initially to control ryegrass, but then there's all sorts of other system benefits in there now. Keeping all the residue undisturbed on the top, we've got that mulch layer building up, which, that's really good for building soil health and soil resilience. So we have done a fair bit of amelioration, particularly on our sandy soils in the last 10 or so years. Moldboard ploughing was a big thing that we did on all our deeper sands. We've moldboard ploughed pretty much all of our deep sands now, and that's made a huge difference. So we're getting really good productivity out of those moldboarded sands, and in the trials that I've seen around the place, moldboard ploughing and spading both seem to have the longest lasting benefits on the sandy soil types. On our heavier soils, we're not ameliorating them, we're leaving them alone, and they seem to be doing well, unameliorated. We did apply gypsum 10 years ago, some fairly high rates of gypsum, but I'm not seeing the yield responses to gypsum at the moment, so we won't be doing any more of that. It's really, the heavy soils look after themselves. If you look after them, they pay you back with interest. So certainly the lighter soils, we've done a lot of moldboard ploughing, but we're not deep ripping. We do have a good deep ripper, we're not using it. A lot of people around here are. I'm not seeing the gains that other people are seeing, and I do see a lot of downsides to ripping. Certainly in crop establishment can be a problem. Non-wetting sands are worse when you deep rip. Weed management gets harder. I'm just finding with the system that we're farming, I just don't see those big gains from deep ripping. We're controlled traffic everywhere. We're still getting big tap roots on our stuff that we moldboard ploughed 10 years ago. So yeah, it's a fairly simple sort of system. We're not intensive farmers, we're not out there every day in tractors. There's no tractors rolling around the paddock here today. Just focusing on the soil health really, I think, seems to be sort of solving a lot of those problems. Whenever something new comes along, I always like to try it. But, of course, the difficulty with these things is actually getting good information from it. So it takes a lot of work to make sure that if you try something that you can actually measure it, you know where it was, someone doesn't accidentally harvest it before you get there and all that sort of stuff. So whenever we do anything, and if we do it across the whole farm, then I'll even nil strip because I want to validate it. I want to know that it worked. It's surprising the number of things that, are supposed to be surefire winners, that whenever I try them, they're not a winner for me, so we don't spend our money on them. And, again, all these little things add up to your margin at the end of the day. So look, I'm always really excited if somebody wants to trial something on our farm. It's nothing like having a trial on your own farm to really see, how it's going to work for you. So I'm pleased these guys have put a trial here because I am interested in, alternative ways of building soil health. In the past, I think there have been a lot of snake oils and remedies promoted that haven't really survived the test of time. But in most cases, if you ask them for replicated trial data and things, it's not forthcoming. Whereas these guys, they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're putting the trial in, and they want to run it for 5 years. So and they're saying that the soil carbon can improve, which on paper it's hard to see how that happens. But let's keep an open mind and give them the opportunity to test it, and let's see what happens. I'll trial pretty much anything that I think might have some merit. I'll trial it. Usually it's a spray or it's a fertiliser. I mean, fertiliser trials are harder, particularly if you've got to do it at seeding time, because that takes quite a lot of coordinating. You've got various shift drivers and all that sort of stuff. So that is tricky. So we'll tend to just do 1 or 2 of those. And also you've got a shed full of fertiliser, your seed is full. You don't have to wait for it to be empty to put a bag of this and a bag of that in. So they get a lot harder. Certainly spray trials are easy to manage because you can just stick a bit in your tank and go and put a strip out and put some markers at the end of the run. Deep ripping, moldboard ploughing, all of those things that we've done trials over periods of years. Like I bought my first moldboard plough, I think it was about 2003. Actually, it was in this paddock where we trialled it, and it was a 3-furrow moldboard plough, and I didn't know anything about it, neither did anyone else around here. So just did a 40-foot strip up a paddock just at the other end of this paddock here, and we've just watched it since then, and that was sort of how we cut our teeth and worked out whether it was a good idea or not. So yeah, sort of anything that is practical to do a strip of, if it looks like it's got merit, we'll give it a go. So I wasn't involved in actually putting the trial in. We set aside a site for them, and Southeast Agronomy Research put the trial in for the Carbon Ag crew. I've pretty much just provided a site for them, but I'm interested in seeing what they want to do, and them wanting to have a site here, I'm really pleased about that. But what I understand, they've got the DKP product, which is a highly concentrated liquid potassium and phosphorus product. And then there's the C33 or the carbon 33 pellets, which I gather is a composted domestic waste product. So recycling domestic waste from the cities and converting it into like a compost granule that can be seeded through the seeding machinery at seeding time. So when you look in terms of total tonnes of carbon per hectare, it's tiny that you're applying, and the traditional scientists will say, well, that can't increase your soil carbon, and maybe it can, maybe it can't, but these guys are it's a fully replicated trial, so we'll get some really good information out of it in 5 years' time. We'll know whether it's a good thing or not. We selected this site here. It's a pretty non-wetting site. It's a sandy top over a dome clay, probably sort of 6 inches, I suppose, or 150 mils of sand over a dome clay. It can be a slightly challenging soil type. I mean, with the clay underneath, it tends to perform reasonably well, but getting crops established is tricky. And of course, being a sandier soil, it's always good to try to build the organic carbon in those soil types. It's easy to run them down. So we sort of selected this site, and also obviously it's a fairly consistent site. It's surprisingly hard to find a site big enough for a trial this size where it's consistent, where you don't have that variability that's going to affect the trial results. So this is a pretty consistent sort of 6 inches of sand over clay soil type here. So this year was an interesting year on this farm. Most of Western Australia's had a pretty spectacularly wet year. And on our southern farm, we're waterlogged. We were waterlogged for quite a bit of the season, and the crops are not very good. But on this particular farm and this particular site, actually, this end of the farm, I think it's pretty much the driest pocket in the WA wheat belt. Yeah, so we've only just clocked over 200 mils for the year here. I think we're up to about 240 now for the year with this 20 mils that we've just had. So for us, that's probably about a decile 3, decile 4 rainfall year. And we had no summer rain. Like a lot of this country didn't even get a summer spray, like it didn't need it. We don't run any sheep. So pretty much no summer rain, which is unusual for us. We normally get a third of our rainfall in summer. The opening, we sort of had 10 mils, I think, in April. And we were sort of half wet, half dry through to May. But this being wheat, this was at the end of the program. And we did get quite a bit of rain sort of second week of May, sort of drizzle. Not a big volume, but enough to wet the soil up. So by the time we were seeding in here, it was just wet enough for sowing wheat. So we had a pretty good strike, our own machine, and that was about the same time they seeded this trial. But yeah, there hasn't been vast quantities of rain all year. I'm surprised how good the crop is for the amount of rain we've had. Again, I think that's just a testament to the way these soils are performing now, with the sort of a high residue farming that we're doing. And it makes me feel pretty good that we can achieve crops like this on not a huge amount of rainfall. So yeah, it's not a wet year by any means for us. Pretty much all year we could have easily handled another 1 to 2 inches of rain at any point in time. But we've had a lovely finishing rain now, sort of better part of an inch. If it just stays cool like this for another couple of weeks, I think it's going to be happy days. We run a pretty simple fertiliser regime here, so we're using 70 kilos of MAP and 30 kilos of MOP seeding, which I think gets you to about 15 of P and about similar to that of K down the tube, and only about 5 units of N down the tube. And then all our nitrogen is broadcast by way of urea. So this paddock got 120 units of N broadcast as urea at about, I think it was at about the 5-leaf stage. They've got a plot in the trial which is basically replicating our fertiliser treatment using MAP and MOP. And I don't know if they used urea or Flexiam, but essentially it'll be the same. So that's the sort of baseline they're comparing to. And then they've got, I think then they halve those baseline rates of fertiliser and then replace that missing fertiliser with their products, the DKP, and then the carbon pellet is extra to that. Obviously there's less kilograms per hectare of potassium and phosphorus in the DKP product than there is in the MAP and MOP, but the idea being it's more available. So that's my understanding of it. Certainly when we looked through the trial sites, we had a field day here and it was pretty unanimous that the 50 kilos of carbon 33 pellets on top of their DKP sort of substitute program was the best looking site. But really, I mean, right through the site, all the treatments look pretty good. And the header will tell the story, so the harvest yields will be really interesting. Where the higher rates of the carbon 33 pellets went on it, there certainly did seem to be an improvement in the plant health and the vigour, so that's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of that. Look, if I was set up for banning liquids at seeding time, I'd definitely be doing some strips with the DKP product. It's an easy thing to do, but I'm not. So we went away from using liquids probably 5 or 6 years ago. It was just slowing down our seeding operation, having that extra product. While the Alpha Disc is capable of using liquids, it's set up to use liquids, my air cart is not. So I won't be able to trial the DKP through my own seeder, but I've got this trial here, so I'll be learning a lot from that. But certainly if I was set up for liquids, I'd definitely be giving it a go and just trying it through my own machinery. But it's not to say that in another 4 or 5 years' time we wouldn't be transitioning back to liquids if there's a good case for it. So I'll keep an open mind on that. I think also with the soil wetters that people are seeming to be getting good results with. At the moment, there may be a case for going back to using liquids at sowing. So, we'll keep an open mind on that, but at the moment I'm not set up for that. So, but what we're doing seems to be working okay, but certainly keeping an open mind. With the carbon pellets, it'd probably be interesting to just do some strips. But again, I've got the trial here, so that's the advantage. We can just get on with our seeding operation and these guys can do all the hard work. But yeah, look, by all means, if any of these products show an economic benefit or some other benefit that can be quantified that's worthwhile, definitely, we'd certainly phase it into the program. So ultimately, with any product, if we're going to spend money on a product, we need to see a gain for it. So I'm not here to just build soil carbon as an end in itself. Building soil carbon, for me, the point of doing that is building the resilience and the health of the soil so that we can then grow better crops. And that's obviously more sustainable, but it's also more profitable, which is part of sustainability is profitability. In fact, I'd say it was the first tier of sustainability. So yeah, we're always looking for that sort of profitability edge. And even if you don't see it in the short term, if you know it's it's building your profitability and your sustainability in the longer term, by all means. So there's all sorts of different things we're looking for when we introduce a new product. But obviously, the easy one is you put a product on, you grow a higher yield, and your bottom line is improved. That's the easy decision. But if applying these pellets, the carbon 33 pellets, if that can in fact actually build soil carbon, I know that building soil carbon is good for productivity. I know that it's going to increase our profitability over time. So if in fact it's shown that it can do that, then definitely there'd be a really strong case for bringing it in. I believe this trial site is to run for 5 years, and I think realistically 5 years. Look, if you see a carbon improvement over 5 years, that's miraculous. It's been pretty well established. Everyone, the current buzzword is I'll build agricultural soil carbon to solve the global warming problem. It's grossly oversimplifying the reality of the situation, which is incredibly difficult to grow the soil carbon in agricultural soils. Incredibly difficult. So if indeed this product is able to assist in doing that's a breakthrough. Again, keep an open mind. And if we're ever going to find out it can do it, it's through these trials. So. I think we'd have to give it a period of 5 years and then look at the beginning and the end of that period and just say, well, what changes have we seen? But certainly increasing photosynthesis seems to be the way to build soil carbon. It's taking more CO2 out of the air and it's putting it in a stable form. The trick, of course, is keeping that in the soil and not letting it get back into the atmosphere as CO2 again. So, perhaps there's a little bit of magic in the way that happens. We'll see. Look, the tiny amount of carbon that you're adding in the carbon pellet isn't going to increase your soil organic carbon percentage one little bit. But, if it does trigger some other processes in the soil, we like to think, we're a scientific sort of industry. We like to think we understand everything. I think when it comes to soil health, we understand almost nothing. It's like human health, what's going on in the gut. I associate what happens in the gut to what's happening in the soil. There's a lot of mystery and mystique about it still. I do think there's probably an element of stuff that we don't understand about what's happening in there. And, there's an element of trial and error required, I think, to see if we can trigger things to actually improve that process of carbon sequestration, if you want to call it that. Bit of a buzzword, we're really just about building soil health, but that really is what it comes down to. So, yeah, look, if it can trigger some biological processes and maybe part of it will be actually just preventing some of that carbon in cellulose from being released back as CO2 when it's broken down, if it can somehow if you're building soil biology that will actually capture it a little bit more and put it into a soil form of stable carbon, who knows? Let's just wait and see. I'm not going to try to preempt it. I'm no sort of evangelist about it. I'm pleased that they're keen to try it on our farm, and I'm keen to see what it can do. But I certainly don't think that we can just answer all these questions with current scientific theory, because we can't. I'm not sure that building soil health has been a top priority over the last 100 years in many parts of the state. One of the advantages we have here is most of this country was only opened up, 40 years ago. So it's still relatively young. So it's had less time to be impacted by, older farming systems. Like most of the farming life of this soil, we've been here since 2002. It's actually becoming a fairly significant period of this farm's life as agricultural land. And we've been really focusing on building soil health and residue retention and all of that. So when you look at that, there's probably been less harm done. So probably starting from a better base. And they're quite good soils. We do have a good clay base, which is a really high buffering sort of a clay. So, So your deeper sands, they're more difficult, certainly through the central wheat belt where you've got acidity issues, you're down to 3.5 pH at subsoil and things. There's some really big challenges there, and you've got low rainfall as well and low productivity to sort of pay for the emollients. We're in a more fortunate situation here. We're starting from a better base, and we've got the productivity to actually pay for doing some things if we need to. But yeah, I think there has, there were periods in our history, I think, where it was more about just getting as much as you can out of the land than it was about putting anything back into it. I think our mindset has changed over the last 20, 30 years. No-till was the beginning of that through the 90s, which is when we started farming. It was a good time to start farming because no-till was very much the buzzword then, and all the reasons behind it, sort of really made a lot of sense to us. So that's been pretty much our focus the whole way through. So yeah, I think we're seeing benefits from that. But even on the more degraded soils, through other parts of the state, people are still getting really good productivity from them. But they're having to spend a fair bit of money to ameliorate them in certain cases, which is probably a bit of catch up, from years of sort of extracting from those soils. So, but I think all soils can be improved, and I don't think a lot of it has to be spending a lot of money. I think a lot of it's just being smart about how we treat them with kindness rather than sort of just flogging them. Wind erosion and bare ground and those kind of things, they're just very clearly just bad for the soil health. Just eliminating those basic things is a really good start, and then after that, it's how can we just keep building it from there. We used to soil test the same sites every year, forever. Like the year I started farming, I got into soil testing, and once we got a GPS, which was the late 90s, I think, just a little handheld Garmin thing, we would actually start marking where they were and try to test the same site every year. And we started doing that when we bought this place, but then after about 10 years of doing that, I realised that nothing was really changing. And why was I doing it? Because these things change on a macro scale, not on a micro scale. So if you see a change in pH or carbon from one year to the next, it's something that happened with the soil testing, not with the soil. Because we'd see that the soil carbon would go from 1.3 down to 1.1 and up to 1.4, in subsequent years. And it's just, where they happen to poke the probe, I think. I'm not quite sure, but we did do a lot of deep soil coring back in 2007. We did, we EM surveyed this farm, and EM38, and then we did variable rate gypsum across the farm based on those maps. And as part of that, to sort of work out our rates, we did deep soil coring on 10 sites across the farm on different soil types. And I haven't really gone back to that stuff, but I did want to baseline the farm. And I'm really interested in baselining the carbon on this farm, not because I want to sell carbon credits, because I don't, but I think it'd be really good to actually just baseline the farm. And I know there's some of the technology now for doing that. And I'm looking with Brad from Carbon Ag about whether we can set something up on our seeder so that as we're seeding, we could be getting a carbon baseline for the farm. Because it would be actually good in 20 years' time to actually know what we've achieved. And, it's like they say, if you want to plant a tree, the best time to plant it is 10 years ago, but the second best time to plant it is now. So, with a carbon baseline, and the sooner we can do that, the better. But it's good because we did those soil cores in 2007, and I haven't been back to them. It'd actually be a good time probably to go back and do them again in the same sites and just, see what has changed. I wouldn't mind betting our soil carbon is still going down, really hard to measure, even over a 10-year, 15-year period, but I wouldn't mind betting it is still probably going down slowly because it's incredibly difficult to build soil carbon, and especially as we're continually increasing our yield productivity off this country, we're probably a good tonne to the hectare better than we were 10 years ago on the same soil and same rains, which is just huge. But that doesn't come from nowhere, and we're always playing catch up with fertiliser rates and things to try to make sure we keep up to our new productivity levels. So some of that would be coming out of the soil. So it's not tragic, but it's certainly we need to be staying in front of it. So if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, I suppose. So it would be good to go back and do some of that analytical stuff now. But yeah, and then how to fix that, that's the next question that we need to solve. Look, I'm pretty excited that having started farming around 1990, up until now, what's that, 30 years later, not very good at my maths anymore. Really it has changed from just, probably the really old sort of labouring type agriculture when we started to what's now a very technical and scientific and exciting industry to be in. But the focus has also changed during that period, from just like a chemical farming. I think that was like a revelation, chemical farming, what we can achieve with chemicals and chemical fertilisers and all that stuff, and how much that grew our productivity. But it got to a point where if a little bit's good doesn't mean a lot's better. And I think people have gone through that phase a little bit and realised that actually there's a bit more nuance to this. Certainly in our case, like I don't use insecticides, haven't used any insecticides probably 3 or 4 years now. Like not even on my canola, which people find a bit shocking. Sort of become a bit normal for people to use broad spectrum insecticides several times a year on their farm, and I'm just horrified by what that's doing to your soil biology, which we're trying to grow. That's sort of what's driven that for me, and I'm finding we're not getting any more insects than anybody else without using insecticides because, you know, our system is a bit more resilient. And it's not because I'm a greenie or anything like that. I hate the products. I mean, they kill humans as well as insects, and it just doesn't seem right to be spraying them onto the soil where we're trying to build soil biology. So, and I think, you know, that's probably unusual. I don't know anybody else who's doing that. But certainly I think everybody is starting to think, look, we can't just keep putting more and more stuff on this soil and think it's going to make it better when a lot of these things are designed to kill things, you know, like that doesn't all stack up when you think about it. So I think we've gone through that phase of just pouring stuff on and now realising actually let's get down to the nitty gritty of what's really helping and what's actually interfering with the process of building our soils. And we can probably start taking some of those things out and replacing them with things that are actually more, you know, more positive in terms of soil health. Yeah, look, we have had quite a few sort of products come and go over my 30 years in farming, and generally if they won't, you know, they'll always show you a fence line and this side was treated and that side wasn't and this side had yielded better, and who knows what the history of the two paddocks was or whatever. You know, it's not scientific enough, and those products have come and gone because they didn't stack up. But I remember that one of the first years I was farming, we had some pretty raw heavy country, and I used a product called Super Simcoat, which I don't think is around anymore, but it was in a bucket. It was a black sort of molassesy, seaweedy sort of liquid. I don't even know what it was, but it had zinc and manganese in it. But my crops, you know, I'd put trail strips out and the crops always emerged better and looked healthier at the start of the year, and then the product came off the market, which was a shame. And in my strips it always yielded better. So I know there's a little bit in this sort of we don't understand what's happening, but it still helps sort of approach. But look, I'm really pleased that, you know, now in 2021, we actually have, it's a bit more mainstream, and I think that's because farmers are now, it's more part of our vernacular. You know, we're talking about soil health and that sort of stuff. There's a bit of pull coming from farmers, so that makes it easy for companies like Carbon Ag to come out with a product, properly validate it. So you can't call it a snake oil if it shows up that it works in a proper scientifically replicated trial. Independent trial, it's not run by them, it's run by independent companies. So yeah, look, I think it's really great that rather than just fert and squirt, now we're actually looking a little bit wider at some of the other things that, and I'm not saying it works or it doesn't. I'm just saying, look, it's great that they're testing it, and hopefully more companies will come in. You know, if they've done the work and they've done lab work and found that some product seems to improve plant growth or improve soils, you know, put it into proper scientific trials, and let's see if they work. You know, bring it on as far as I'm concerned. I think it's really great that that's becoming a bit more mainstream now, and we'll see a little bit more than just chemicals and fertilisers.